Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Lead with Giants TV. I'm your host, Tal. I have a special guest this morning, the author of What More Can I Say, Dianna Booher, and she's with us this morning. Dianna, welcome to our show. I'm glad we're connected here in Dallas. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Great. We started a little bit on the chilly side of the morning, but we've got a warm weekend ahead of us, so I'm sure Dianna is looking forward to that. How long have you been in Dallas? Just a quick question.
Oh, about 25 years. This is where I
Oh,
grew up, and I love it here.
this is home for you.
Yes, yes. I've
Good.
been in several places and actually lived out of the country for a while, but this is what I call home, where I call home.
Great. Now, where about in Dallas? I'm just curious. Where are you?
Paulyville.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a great area. Definitely
Well,
developed.
that plane, you might as well make it convenient.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And I also have my co-host Liz Stanselli. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Tal, Diana. Great
Yes,
to be here.
sure.
Great. And we're going to have a wonderful show. We are, as I mentioned, great. Got this book about a week ago. What more can I say? Why communication fails and what to do about it. We've got a great community of leaders and managers and people in different industries that would like to really take a look at their communication, whether it's work or relationships, and how to improve it. And I can't think of a better person. Diana has been in the field of communication, of training and author and speaking around the country about communication. And I believe you have almost 46 books out there about communication.
I do. I do. You have to do something when you're staying in all those hotels, right?
Right, right, right. Well, I want to ask you just a personal question. What inspires you to write about communication and explore that field?
Actually, politicians. You see all this political discourse and both sides aggressively sending out messages, and it seems like no one's listening. And so we're all on social media, we're all sending out training messages, we're all sending out our book messages. Everybody has something to communicate, whether it's a product or service, and it's harder and harder to get attention. And so what I wanted to explore in the book was, what do you have to do to stand above the crowd? And why don't people listen? What makes people not listen? And why do they listen? Why do some messages really resonate? And that's the basis for those 9 laws in the book.
That's great, and we'll dive right into it. And I want to ask you the question in kind of the banner of your book is, and I'm not sure if there's a silver bullet. It's really difficult to really narrow it down. But you've been working with organizations and leaders, and what do you find? Where does communication fails? Is it clarity? Is it just getting a buy-in? Is it people just not capturing the message that the leader is communicating? What is your perspective on that?
Well, I think one of the main reasons it fails is that people think that if they're outgoing, that they normally are a good communicator. They don't understand that there are really techniques and principles to it. They think, gee, I was born talking, I was talking by the age of 2, and therefore I must be good at it. Or they feel if they're comfortable in meeting people, or if they're just vivacious, or if they seem to establish rapport, therefore they must be good. And that's not necessarily true. Just because you establish a rapport doesn't mean that you're necessarily persuasive, or that necessarily people buy into what you're saying. They may listen and then walk away and do the total opposite of what you're asking them to do. And there has to be an awareness that there are concrete do's and don'ts that make you successful.
And really, it sounds the way you're describing as it's not enough to be charismatic and just a people person, as they like to say. You really have to know some of the things that are the self-awareness. How does my communication impacts or influence another person? I know we talked about, you mentioned that in the book as well, is that leadership and communication is very much how you influence people. So you have to be aware of your influence, whether it's 2 people or 10 people, right?
Right. And I think that lack of, sometimes people almost equate it to breathing. It's just a natural thing. I breathe, therefore I'm a communicator. And that's just not true. And some of the people who are the most comfortable on their feet can be the worst communicators. I mean, they are broadcasting all the time, but that doesn't mean they have the impact that they intentionally want to have. That's a totally different thing when you're wanting to intentionally get a message across.
Yeah, we'll talk about the impact as well, and I also want to have Liz dive into this conversation. She's got a burning question about communication, so Liz, go right ahead. Oh, Liz, are you with us? I think she may have frozen on her end, so oh, there, she's coming back. But let's talk about that impact. How can leader make an impact with their communication? I have I always thought about, we think about the great communicators such as Ronald Reagan, some of those JFK, Martin Luther King. What makes a great communicator in your opinion?
I think the first rule, and it's foundational rule that I mentioned right up front in the book, and that is the ability to establish trust. And I know that most people think they establish trust, but there are many things in ways that people communicate distrust. And to think how common that is, and the wall, how common the wall is that we have. Think about how often you walk into a store to buy something, you're shopping, and the sales clerk says, "May I help you?" and you immediately say, "No, thank you, we're just looking." I mean, we just have this wall up that keeps people out because we're so skeptical about spin and about people bothering us. We just now have this huge wall that says, "Don't bother me, I know what I want, and I know how to find the information." And that's even greater now because of the ability to research information on the internet. So one thing is that we just turn people off because we don't like them, we don't trust them. And immediately you see people and you think, they're too slick. I don't believe anything they say. And so you have to learn what it is that you need to do to make people actually believe you and trust you. And one of them, of course, is like you. That's the first step. People have to like you. But they have to trust that you're going to tell them the truth, that even if it's bad news, even if it's something that would not benefit you, that they're going to come clean, so to speak, that they're going to tell you the hard truth. And if you think about it, there are very few friends even in your life. There are very few family members that will tell you the truth in kindness. Now, you can have people who tell you the truth in a harsh way that hurt your feelings, but people who really care enough to tell you honestly the truth, and that makes you trust people. And you also have to trust somebody who's competent. I mean, you can like somebody really, really well. I mean, it could be a family member, and you actually love them to death, but they're incompetent. For example, they tell you, "Look, I'll bring that report. I'll have it for you Friday morning. You can give it to your client," but 1 out of 5 times they don't come through for you.
Right.
They're consistent, and so you can't trust them. You may love them, but you can't trust them. So there's just some specific things that have to be there before you totally trust that other person. And if you don't do those, you can't get to first base with a more important message, whatever that specific message, whether it's about your product or service or whatever you're trying to change their mind about.
It sort of reminds me, and I'm not sure if the correct phrase or the statement is, tell me what I need to hear rather than what I would like to hear. That's sort of, and this is where trust comes in between. You think about our families or someone who is really close. We may not like the message that they delivered, but they are acting in our best interests. Therefore, we trust them. But we really, at that point, this is what you need to hear from me. How it was delivered sometimes is not the best delivery, but just knowing that, when you mention trust, kind of 2 point of views kind of came to my mind. Is there is, as we know, if you've seen some of the stuff that's out there in our society and politics, there's a lack of trust, and especially in communication, where someone would say one thing and deliver another, and there's a lack of trust because of different things that our public and society is seeing out there with political leaders. And so it's critical, and sometimes it happens in organizations as well, where we need to it sounds like we really need to restore that trust with people. Credibility is important with people, and not just saying the right things, but also what is your credibility as a leader? Have you done what you say you'll do? Is that a kind of a fair assessment?
Absolutely. What they say doesn't match what they do, and that has to link up. And another thing that I discussed in the book is the matter of collaboration versus the monologue. And that is really important as a second step in getting your message across. A lot of people, a lot of leaders particularly, have a communication style. You mentioned delivery. The communication style is, I deliver the message and you listen.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can even have the person's best interest at heart, but it doesn't come across that way because
Right.
you're always saying, I want to control the conversation, I'm sending the message down. And people say, well, it takes too long to build consensus. It takes too long to have a discussion about everything.
Right.
And
Right.
I know what's best for them. I've already studied the situation, and I've got the problem solved. But it really takes a great leader to be able to lead by asking questions and building collaboration. And people own things when you let them collaborate on it. And when I did the research and interviewed a lot of executives, a lot of senior executives for this book, and one of those executives, I love the metaphor he used. He said, I like to ask questions. I like to throw out half-baked ideas. Now, I know that's a pejorative term,
Yeah.
but he said it this way. He says, when I throw out half-baked ideas rather than having them cooked and done, I'd rather my staff take it and finish cooking it so they have a gourmet meal at the end. Therefore, they own it, and
Right.
they take credit for it. And the reason a lot of leaders don't do that is because they want all the credit themselves. When it turns out great, they want to say, I did it. You know, this
Right.
is my strategic plan. And they don't want to share the credit. But a great leader really throws out provocative questions, and he guides the team, and he guides the organization. And he's known for the questions he asks or she asks rather than all the answers.
I love that. That's a great way to create a dialogue. And speaking of collaboration, let me collaborate with Liz and Sally here on this interview. So Liz, go right ahead.
Dianna, to play into that collaboration, can you talk about a little bit about the role that communication plays in engaging our employees?
Yes, anytime the employee gets to share, they are revealing a lot about themselves. They're revealing what they value, and what they value many times is way different, totally different than what the leader thinks. And when I did the book, I found the CEOs, the vice presidents that I talked to, gave me example after example of how they had thought that this would be a tremendous reward for this employee group, but when they collaborated on the idea, the employees thought something else was not important, and something else was vitally important to them. So collaboration is about much more than just letting them think they have commitment in it, what they say is important. It really guides the organization. So you're getting what they sense is important, what it is really important, what they value. But more than that, it's their commitment. Once they finish, like going back to that metaphor I used earlier, once they finish an idea and put their hands on it, they are committed to executing. And we all know organizations where things just don't get done. You know, you have a strategic initiative, and it's kind of like the flavor of the day. We've heard that phrase. It just never gets finished because people don't own it. They don't feel like it's their idea. So I think that's why it's really important that you let them take it and execute it so it gets finished and it really gets done.
This is such a great question, and I wanted to kind of a little bit expand on that in terms of, you know, not just engaging, but you're engaging with a diverse workforce more than any other time, different generations, different cultures. What is your perspective? I'm curious to see how communication now. We need to consider the cultural diversity, the generational diversity that we have in the workforce. I know for me as a leader and a manager, I had to adapt to that. What is your perspective on that?
I think the principles that I covered are applicable across all cultures. I know one particular CEO, and I drew studies when I did these persuasion principles. I drew studies from around the globe, and one particular executive vice president I interviewed for the book was with Ingredion, and he was talking about using this collaboration principle and how it held true. They have a workforce around the world, and he was talking about just because of this principle to collaborate, that in their particular industry, the turnover rate was generally a 2-digit turnover rate every year. Because they used collaboration, their retention, their ability to hold employees was less than 2%. So he was talking about the value of that in a multicultural workforce. So I think the principles are universal, and I think the value of getting all the cultures to contribute is extremely valuable.
That's great. I love that. Flipping the coin, we're talking about speaking and creating a collaborative environment or collaborative culture. What makes a great listener?
I think the key thing makes a great listener is the intention to listen. Most people have no intention whatsoever to listen. They are always in broadcast mode. And I put together a grid, in fact, in one of the chapters. I think it's the chapter on taking perspective. Most people realize they have a bias. And you've always heard it's great to be empathetic, but there's a time when being an empathetic listener makes you a poor negotiator.
Mm-hmm.
And when you listen and it's always moving you to understand the other person but not understand where you can persuade that other person for their best benefit, it's not a good situation. So understanding as a listener what your bias is, what the other person's bias is, and listening for all parties involved in the conversation, and then being able to step outside your bias and see what everybody in the conversation, what their bias is, and take perspective and see what's in the best interest of everybody is what I've called perspective taking. That makes you a tremendous listener.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can become much more persuasive. So all of those things are benefits to being persuasive, to being a great listener. Taking notes, using appropriate body language as you listen, listening for opportunities, listening for areas of agreement. Many people, when they listen for areas where we disagree, where there's going to be conflict, what I need to bring up to see if we can work out. And as a good listener, what you're listening for are, where do we have mutual agreement? Where's an opportunity that we could work together? Where are all the different parties coming together? It's a totally different perspective on listening.
Mm-hmm. And considering, I think you really described that well, considering a win-win situation for, as you mentioned really early in the answer, is do you intend to understand the other person from their truth and their perspective, and rather than just closing that door, seeing, well, where can we find the common ground? Maybe there's we're not going to agree on everything, but we can find a common ground between you and I, and there's after all, organizations exist to accomplish a goal together rather than just from your perspective or from your angle. So it's really important that we, I know, for example, in my hotel, we have that one goal that we strive for, great customer service, and when everybody's focused on that and it doesn't become a personal agenda, then we're all here for the same thing. And I think that's what you describe in your answer there.
Right. And it's being able to step outside your bias. Many people can't get outside their bias and realizing I have a bias, but there is a nucleus where it's to the good of everyone involved.
That's great. I want to ask, kind of closing with this question is, which a lot of us are out there in social media and those type of environments, is where do you think, or do you think we're losing that face-to-face contact? And when it comes to communication nowadays, we are heavily on text, heavily on emails, and we're working 24/7. Our mobile phone just rings off the hook. are we losing that personal touch?
I think we are. I get more and more calls from clients for coaching for that very reason. People have been sitting behind a computer so long, and the
Hmm.
organization calls up the president or the executive vice president and says, this person is stalled in their career. They can't go any further because they don't have what it takes. And they don't. Many times the person who's calling doesn't know how to put it. They just say they lack a little polish. That's the phrase they frequently use. They lack a little
Right.
polish to go to the next level because they don't really have the presence. They call it personal presence. They don't have the personal presence. They
Hmm.
don't know how to carry on small talk, and it can be significant. Small talk doesn't necessarily mean insignificant talk, but they don't know the appropriate topics to bring up. If they have just 3 or 4 minutes with a very significant client, they don't know what's appropriate to say and what's inappropriate to say. They don't know how to phrase a question. If they
Hmm.
need to get feedback from a boss, they don't know how to ask that feedback. When they get significant information, they don't know how to pass it on appropriately. They don't know how to dress appropriately. When somebody says business casual, they don't know the difference between casual and business
Right.
casual. There are just so many nuances of socializing. Um, they don't know how to write in an appropriate tone in their email. There's so much involved there, and they mix up what they would use and the style they would use in communicating on social media, and they mix that style with their email style.
Hmm.
That lapses over, and they have a totally. They're making an impression because that's the picture of their thought process. When they write an email or a more formal document, that is a picture of their thought process. They don't realize the impression they're creating, and they either get the promotion based on that 2 or 3 minutes of impression or not. And I have a lot of studies in the book about what we do is add, and we tend to think we can add more and more and more, and we're creating a good impression. And and the listener or the reader is averaging those things. And you may recall reading that. It's just a good point to keep in mind as we close. I know you were talking about closing here, but people who are on the receiving end average, and we tend to throw a lot in because we're adding, and it's the wrong move.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. It took me years to realize that, it's not so much, when I was just kind of a bit sharing on my end is, probably in my 20s as I was getting into management as far as communication goes, we were, I guess, whether we were taught or where we were, didn't really emphasize, I think we underemphasizing listening as a communication skill in many occasions. And so for me back then, not really being too much, didn't really develop that side of me, is that I thought, well, I just need to share a whole lot of information with my team, and I just need to give them all that information so they can succeed. But we really fail to engage, to really understand. We scratch our heads sometime, and I'm talking about executives, and as you probably know, scratch our heads sometimes and not knowing how to solve a problem, where really the problem is right there in front of you. Just talk to the person and find out how can you win together with this person just by listening and finding out what is their perspective. Whether it's right or wrong really doesn't matter at this point. You're trying to figure out a path or direction, and without the other person, you're not going to be able to do it.
Right. So be able to summarize, pick a point, don't tell them everything you know, but focus on here's this problem and here's the solution.
Yes, definitely. All right. Well, I had a great time. I know, Liz, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're kind of in the middle of work there as well, so I appreciate you joining us. So we had a great session, and for our audience, I'll definitely feature this in our blog post as well. And so there's really, and I can't tell you how much valuable your ideas and insights in this interview has been. Just kind of, my brain is going haywire here. So it's really great to connect with you on that.
Sure, my pleasure, Cal.
All right. Let me just click this one.